looks like from '86 through to '89 that the career kind of stalled a little bit. You arrived back in New Zealand in '89 at Titirangi, and you missed the cut there at the Air New Zealand Shell Open. Do you remember that?
Well, I don't, but I'm sure you're right. Yeah, no, I played okay sort of through '87. Not great, but then it really went downhill. Had a long period of playing pretty poorly. So 89, I decided in '89 that I kind of got completely lost with the golf swing. I didn't really know what I was doing. It was about the time that Faldo was just starting to really shine, having gone through that Ledbetter, sort of David Ledbetter school, I guess. It was right in a big transition was happening in golf, technique-wise. I mean, I think the high-speed camera and had kind of proven that a few of the foundations upon which technique, I guess, had been built weren't accurate. It had always sort of been thought that swing path was the most important factor in determining outcome, and the high-speed camera kind of proved that actually it was club face that was more important than path, and the knock-on of that was a complete change really in the attitude to the way you wanted to swing the club. You wanted to be a lot more by being more rotational. You could hold that club face squarer for longer, and it turned out that was more important than trying to keep the club path on the line. So I went through a really big transition. I worked with David Ledbetter's partner, a guy named Dennis Pugh, in Britain, and he completely tore the old swing up. And basically, I can remember nothing is belittling. He looked at the swing, and I said, "Well, what do you think?" And he said, "Well, tell me what you've been working on, what you've been trying to do." And and he said, "Well, we've got two choices. I can either try and take you back to where you were, or we can try and go forward to something completely different." And I said, "Well, which is going to be easier?" He said, "Well, I think it's just as far back as it is forward."
Right, yeah, sure.
So we sort of made the decision to throw out the old sort of swing, which was completely had to rebuild my thinking about what had to happen in a golf swing. So it was a huge. I think Dennis, to this day, I'll probably tell you, I probably made the biggest transition in terms of technique of anybody he'd ever worked with. So, but it was pretty humiliating for a start. I remember going. The first session I had with him after the initial one, when he looked at the swing, when we started working on it, it was the week of the British PGA, and we went down, or the week after the British PGA, and we went down to the practice fairway at the back end of Wentworth, so they could be on our own, because I was literally just hitting shanks and tops, and I mean it was pretty painful. And just as we'd started, Faldo turned up with a film crew from Golf Digest. He'd just won the PGA and he'd won the Masters, and and they were filming for a thing. And so there was Faldo standing alongside me, just flashing these, making perfect swings and hitting these frozen ropes. And there was me hitting tops and shanks. And
right.
So Dennis said to me afterwards, he said, "Look," he said, "you've proved a lot to me." He said, "If you could stand there and have the discipline and the humility to do that, to go through that, then I reckon you're going to be all right." And anyway, it was pretty bad for a while, and I lost the card in Europe that year, and so I came back to New Zealand, and I was starting to play a little bit better, but not. I was still a long way away from feeling like I knew what I was doing with the swing. I turned up at Paraparaumu, and obviously a course I really liked, and the field was probably a bit weaker that year than it had been, and I played okay, and managed to get myself with a chance on Sunday, and I was lucky on Sunday. The weather was absolutely perfect. It basically didn't blow a breath. All I could do was hit 30-yard cuts. That was kind of the only thing in the arsenal with the big swing changes I've been working on. But and that would have been a real problem if it had been windy, but it wasn't. And I played a pretty good. I think I might have shot 66 in the last round, and ended up winning by 4 or 5 or something. And that and what a huge, and with the benefit of hindsight, that was a massive. If you had to pick a moment, I guess, in my career, things were looking pretty bleak.
Well,
And
you were quoted in the newspaper following that win, saying that it was you were pretty much ready to give the game away, and if you hadn't
well,
have won that,
I was,
sorry.
I was definitely broke. And I was heading off back to the tour school. If I hadn't have made my card at the tour school, that could well have been. Well, that might have been it. As it turned out, as I won there, and then went back to played the World Cup, which was in Spain with Simon Owen, and I think we finished 6th or 7th, which made a few bob. And then went off to the tour school and got my card back, and sort of that was the sort of rebirth of my career a little bit, if you like. So
it's interesting. Obviously, I met you formally in 2005 when we walked around Mount Maunganui together, but I'd been stalking you for several years previous to that, Greg, and I was just a young fella during those wonderful years we had at Paraparaumu when the New Zealand Open was almost in town every year, and it was a regular fixture. And I was part of that crowd, and I mean, I was a big Frank Noblo fan as well, and I think. Like a lot of that gallery, Frank had a lot of people riding on his shoulders that day, and desperate for a New Zealander to win the event again. And there was this famous 12 minutes which occurred with Frank on the 5th hole and you on the 7th hole, which absolutely turned the tournament upside down. Frank, of course, went side to side and walked off with a triple bogey at the same time that you had just sunk a birdie on 7, and there was a 5-shot swing happened, in the space over a couple of holes, but it was those 12 minutes of that really flipped it on its head.
Yeah, I was kind of oblivious because I was a couple behind, and I'd started okay. I think I birdied. I might have birdied a couple of holes early. I think I might have. Okay, yeah, two. All right. Yeah. So I'd had a couple of birdies, and then there was a big crowd following Frank. There wasn't a lot of people following us from memory. And and I remember going down 7, and all of a sudden, this sort of a lot of the crowd, there was quite an influx of people, and I made birdie there, and I thought, I must be pretty close. And I remember there was a scoreboard at the back of the 8th green, and I looked up there, and I had I think I had a 4-shot lead from memory. I mean, it was
5 shots.
I'd gone.
It was a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it might have been 4. Anyway.
Sorry, you're right.
So,
yeah.
And it was like, wow, and that's a kind of an interesting, an interesting position, because you're sort of, on the one hand, you don't want to be looking at the scoreboard, but on the other hand, it's quite a change from going from chasing to being 4 in front.
Yeah.
And I remember on 9. The pin was right up the back on 9, and I was just in the rough off the tee, and I thought, don't be silly, don't be hitting at this flag. There was a pretty out of bounds up there, and water, and it's pretty narrow right at the back of that green.
Yeah.
And I thought, just hit it in the middle of the green, and it just came out a little bit hot, and I guess I was a little bit of a adrenaline, and that thing came up to about 3 feet from the hole. Yeah. And I tapped that in for birdie, and everybody said, what a brave shot that was. And it wasn't brave at all. It was a flyer.
It was interesting just poring over some of the news articles of that event, looking at what clubs were getting played. And the 17th hole, for example, you'd had a triple bogey in the 2nd round. And that's quite fascinating. I mean, you've gone on to win a tournament by 6 shots, and you had a triple bogey in the 2nd round on 17. You had a 2-iron 2-iron 2nd shot to the right-hand side of the green, and failed to get up a couple of times. Amazing. You hadn't, yeah.
Well, it was interesting. I was talking to, funnily enough, I was having a conversation with Steve Williams down at the New Zealand Open recently, and we were just, he was caddying for Ryan Fox, of course, and he's told the story about, when he first went out there, he got to caddy for Peter Thompson early on. I don't know it was over a number of events. He said, I well remember 160 yards was a 4-iron for Peter. So that's 100 meters. He said, he said that's a wedge for Foxy.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting just watching some of the Masters reruns over the weekend, and seeing Jack Nicklaus was hitting a 5-iron into 18, which is now that's kind of they had a wedge to 9-iron in there these days.
And probably the tee's probably 30 yards back from where it was.
Yeah,
yeah. Oh, it's extraordinary. I mean, how much and it's like anything. It's when things happen in small increments, you kind of don't notice so much, and sometimes it takes a look quite a long way back. I remember the first time it really came home to me on what had changed. It wasn't so much in distance, but we played in the early days in Europe. We played the Irish Open at Portmarnock many years, and there's a par 3 there. I want to say it's like 15 along the coast, and narrow green and the beach, sort of dunes and beach on the right, and the wind used to blow quite hard, either off the sea or the other way, and when it blew the other way, you used to stand up and you used to have to aim this damn thing with the old Pro Trad Titleist. You used to aim this thing sort of 20 yards left of the green and just pray that it would hang on. And we hadn't been there in about 10 years, and I got up there in the event, and now we had the Pro V1s and whatever, and it was howling off the left, and you were aiming at the left edge of the green and then just praying that it would fall right, and it was like, that's how much difference. So it wasn't only the distance, but the way the ball travels through the wind now, just the aerodynamics of it. I'm damned if I know how they do it, but it just does not move in the air anything like it used to, and as a consequence, you can't actually hit as many golf shots as you used to. You can't. That was obviously the amount it moved in the air could be a problem, but could also be a blessing if you were having to try and hit a cut up or trying to work the ball on the breeze. But that shot's not really part of the arsenal anymore because the equipment doesn't really allow you to do it.
Right. So you won 89, almost a catalyst for turning things around. You then went through quite a purple patch. You won the Johnny Walker Classic. Was that at Melbourne? Was that at Royal Melbourne?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then you went on in 91. You won, or you found yourself. You did win, but you found yourself in the final pairing with the world's #1 golfer Greg Norman at the Diakio Palm Meadows Classic. Tell us a bit about, growing up, the Shark was one of my favourites. I'll put a disclaimer out there. Absolutely fascinating ball striker. He has an amazing presence. What was it like standing on that first tee with the world's #1 golfer?
Yeah, look, it was interesting. That was a purple patch for golf in Australia as well. There was a bunch of money flooding in from the Japanese market. The Japanese that opened resorts, Palm Meadows, Sanctuary Cove, the Vines were all Japanese money, and they were pouring a lot of money into events. We were playing for what at the time was seemed like a fortune. It was well over $1 million Australian dollars, I think, each of those events. And even back in the early 90s, that was a truckload of cash. So as a consequence, you had, we probably had 10 of the top 20 players in the world came down for the likes of Johnny Walker and Palm Meadows. There was obviously the top Australians, guys like Norman and David Graham, and but the Faldos and Woosnams, and I mean Raymond Floyd, I think, was there from memory, and Curtis Strange. Those were sort of names that travelled. So I'd had a really good win at Johnny Walker. Royal Melbourne has always been just one of my absolute favourite golf courses. So to win around a course like that was very pleasing, and also to win against a field like that. I hadn't been expected to win there, but I was playing okay, and I played really nicely the last day especially, and won that in the end relatively comfortably. I think Ian Baker Finch and I came down the stretch there, and he had a bit of a disaster the last few holes, So I went in. That was when we broke for Christmas, and then went into Palm Meadows. So still feeling pretty good. I'd sort of last start win. It's always nice against a field like that. Yeah. And I remember I shot 74 in the first round, and actually played okay. And cut was going to be level 1 under or something. It was, of course, wasn't difficult. And then I shot 62 on Friday, and it was really strange because sitting in press centre afterwards. They were saying, well, how did you manage to turn it around so much? And it's a funny game, golf. I said, well, look, to be frank, I didn't play that differently. I mean, yesterday I hit 3 bad tee shots. All of them ended up dead, and I made 2 bogeys and a double out of them. And today I hit 3 bad tee shots, and all of them ended up okay, and I made 2 birdies off of them. And got on a roll, and instead I hit the lip 4 or 5 times yesterday, and every time it looked like hitting the lip today, it went in. And and it's hard to explain to people that haven't been there how one day can be 2 over and the next day can be 10 under, and and they're not that different. But anyway, yeah. So I was still, man, I was I don't know what world ranking I would have been, 150 or 200 in the world, and I'm playing with Norman on the Saturday, and of course he's a Queensland boy, so the local hero and the best player in the world at the time, easily. As you say, one of the most impressive ball strikers of all time, probably. And we got on the first tee, and the first tee, it pretty much it's the same every week. You go to the scorer and you get your card, and then you pin sheet, and then you go over and you trade cards with the guy you're playing with. I mean, that's sort of. And I remember, and I got I was pretty nervous playing with Greg, and huge crowd, and I went over to exchange cards, and he looked at me with those blue eyes, steel blue eyes, and said, "I'll swap cards with you when I'm ready to swap cards with you," and turned his back. And I just thought, wow, that's. And I went to my caddy, who's got an Alistair Musgrove. I said, wow. I told him what had happened. I said, why is Greg Norman worried about me? So yeah, I guess he was trying to intimidate, and he didn't need to intimidate me. He was intimidating enough, but I actually got quite a kick out of it. For me, that was sort of almost that gave me a little bit of confidence. I sort of felt like, well, maybe I'm better than if I'm good enough for Greg Norman to be worried, then that's a pretty good sign. And and in the end, I think I won. I think I won that by 4 as well. So it was a good few weeks.